Friends, we can all see that many white bloggers have millions of followers. Please support me too, because my followers are still few. Black bloggers also deserve to be famous. Raised fist medium dark skin tone. My friends, let's unite and lift each other up. Please press subscribe button and like. The first verdict. A chill wind of justice was about to blow through the hallowed halls of the federal courthouse, and its opening chapter began with a single brutal punch. The air, thick with the quiet reverence of the law, was shattered by a sickening crack of bone and a spatter of blood. Rick Duncan, a man whose soul had curdled into a vicious arrogance, had just landed a roundhouse blow on a stranger in a faded polo and jeans. Theodore Hayes. This wasn't how Theo Hayes imagined his first day. Newly confirmed as a federal judge, he had come to Port City not to brawl, but to begin the next chapter of his life. After a long, weary drive, all he wanted was to complete a few simple formalities. He approached the courthouse with a sense of quiet reverence, a man who, after decades of tireless service as a prosecutor and district judge, was about to don the ultimate mantle of legal authority. But he was about to learn that the path to justice wasn't always paved with dignity. Rick Duncan, a courthouse security officer whose bitter failures had curdled into a vicious arrogance, saw Theo not as a man, but as a caricature, a black man in civilian clothes who had no place in this temple of law. It was a simple, prejudiced equation, and it gave Duncan the license to bully. When Theo, with a weary but polite smile, explained he had left his wallet in his car, Duncan saw not a mistake, but an opportunity to assert his meager authority. "No ID, no entry," he sneered, savoring the small victory of turning the man away. Theo, a man who had faced down cunning defense attorneys and hardened criminals, understood the futility of arguing with a small-minded man. He returned to his truck, found his wallet, and came back. This time, he was met with a deliberate, calculated humiliation. Duncan snatched his driver's license, mocked his name, and then let it drop to the floor. "Pick it up," he commanded, a silent dare. It was a moment of public shame, a test of will and character. Theo could feel the rage building inside him, the primal urge to expose this man for the bully he was. But a deeper voice, the wisdom of his late father, a proud carpenter, echoed in his mind. Never let a petty man drag you down to his level. With an act of extraordinary control, Theo bent down, picked up his license, and slipped it back into his pocket without a word. His silence was more defiant than any verbal complaint. The final straw came when Theo's phone rang. It was his wife, Sarah, and in a moment of reflexive comfort, he answered. The sound of his voice triggered Duncan's final explosive rage. "No cell phones," the officer roared, his face a mask of hate. He nudged Theo, a vicious, unprovoked assault that made the judge-to-be stagger. It was the breaking point. This was no longer about misplaced wallet or a dropped license. This was an attack, a physical violation born of pure malice. Theo straightened, the fatigue gone, replaced by the steely calm of a prosecutor who was about to deliver a verdict. His voice, low and even, sliced through the quiet hall like a scalpel. "Officer," he said, each word a bullet, "your conduct is completely unprofessional. It is inappropriate, and it is unacceptable in a place like this." That undeniable truth ignited a powder keg of rage within Duncan. He heard not a critique of his performance, but a challenge to his entire existence. And so, with a bellow of raw fury, he swung. The punch landed with a sickening crack, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis for Theodore Hayes. He hit the cold marble floor, a warm, sticky liquid soaking his hand as he touched his broken nose. The hall fell into a stunned silence. Lawyers, clerks, and fellow officers watched in frozen disbelief. Rick Duncan, however, stood triumphant, chest heaving with adrenaline. He had won. He had asserted his dominance over this man he had so easily dismissed. But his victory was a fleeting illusion. Sergeant Alva, Duncan's supervisor, arrived on the scene, drawn by the commotion. He knelt beside the fallen man, his experienced eyes noting the quiet dignity that radiated from Theo, even in his disheveled and bloodied state. And then he saw it. Theodore's briefcase had fallen open, and from a thick file had slid out. The top page, held together by a gold paperclip, bore the seal of the United States Senate and the Department of Justice. The bold, clear text was a punch to all of his gut. Notice of official appointment. Federal court judge, Port City District, named Theodore Marcus Hayes. The blood drained from Sergeant Alva's face. He looked at Rick Duncan, who still stood in a defiant pose, and his gaze was no longer angry, but filled with profound, bone-chilling horror. Duncan, confused by the sudden shift, sputtered his prepared lies. But his story had already been judged and found wanting. The man he had attacked wasn't a commoner. He was the law itself. With Alva's help, Theodore Hayes rose slowly, his posture radiating an authority that transcended his blood-stained clothes. His eyes, though pained, were no longer tired. They were cold, piercing, and powerful, the eyes of a prosecutor staring at a defendant. "Officer Rick Duncan," he said, his voice echoing with the weight of his new title, "is currently under arrest for assault on a federal officer in the performance of his official duties pursuant to Title 18, United States Code, Section 111. It was not a request. It was a verdict. His first judgment from this court, delivered not from a bench, but from the very floor of the main hall. As Duncan's pathetic pleas for mercy were cut short by Theo's unyielding gaze, he watched as two young officers under Sergeant Alva's direction disarmed and cuffed him. But Theo was not done. He ordered a full federal investigation, demanding all camera footage, logs, and complaint files related to Duncan and his team. The punch, a moment of unbridled cruelty, had inadvertently become a lever to clean house. It exposed a hidden culture of prejudice and harassment that had festered within the courthouse security. Rick Duncan's downfall was swift and absolute. He was fired, indicted, and ultimately sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for his crime. Weeks later, Judge Theodore Hayes was sworn in as the judge in Courtroom 1. The scar on the bridge of his nose was a permanent, almost imperceptible reminder of his first day. He did not speak of the incident in his inaugural address. Instead, he spoke about the sanctity of justice and how it begins not on a high bench, but at the very threshold of the building. Justice must be demonstrated in the respect, fairness, and integrity of every individual who serves it, he declared, from the doorman to the highest judge. Judge Hayes' story became a cautionary tale in Port City. It taught a powerful lesson. True power lies not in uniforms or titles, but in character and integrity. Arrogance and prejudice are blinding lights. And in their glare, a man like Rick Duncan failed to see that the person he was trying to humiliate was the living embodiment of the justice he was about to face. Never judge a book by its cover, for one day you may be insulting the author. Judge Hayes' patience before the attack was absolutely a sign of wisdom. He understood that engaging with a small-minded bully like Rick Duncan on his terms would only escalate the situation and compromise his own dignity. By maintaining his composure and refusing to be baited, he not only honored his father's advice, but also demonstrated an incredible strength of character. True authority isn't about winning a shouting match. It's about holding your ground and letting your actions speak for themselves. His restraint was the very thing that made his final, powerful verdict so effective.